In the summer of 2022, a quiet notification sent shockwaves through the boardrooms of Silicon Valley and the engineering offices of Northern Virginia. Dominion Energy, the utility giant responsible for powering the most concentrated hub of data centers on the planet, issued a warning that few expected and even fewer were prepared for. They informed developers in Loudoun County, specifically in the global heart of the internet known as Data Center Alley, that they might not be able to provide power to new facilities for several years. This was not a failure of capital or a lack of demand. It was a failure of physics. The sheer volume of electricity required to sustain the next generation of artificial intelligence had finally collided with the rigid, physical limitations of an aging electrical grid. We have spent the last decade obsessed with the exponential growth of chips and the wizardry of large language models. But we have largely ignored the copper, the steel, and the high-voltage lines that actually make this digital revolution possible. The AI revolution is currently sprinting at light speed, while the infrastructure it depends on is moving at a tectonic crawl. This is the story of the AI energy wall, a systemic bottleneck that threatens to stall the greatest technological advancement of our time. Before we dive into the mechanics of this grid collapse, I invite you to join our investigation. If you value deep systemic analysis that goes beneath the surface of the headlines to explain how the world actually works, please subscribe and hit the like button. It is the only way to ensure this type of long-form research remains sustainable in an era of fleeting attention. Stay with us until the very end, because we will reveal a specific, overlooked vulnerability in the global supply chain that could lead to a permanent stagnation of AI capabilities, unless a radical and costly transformation of our physical world happens immediately. The numbers don't lie, and they suggest that the most powerful tool ever created by humanity is about to run out of breath because it simply cannot find enough electrons to consume. The fundamental problem we are facing is a phenomenon known as infrastructure decoupling. In the digital realm, software can scale almost infinitely. You can double the parameters of a model or increase its training data by 10 times, and the primary constraint is capital and compute. However, compute is not an abstract concept. It is the physical conversion of electrons into information. While Moore's law has historically allowed us to pack more transistors into smaller spaces, the total energy density required by these new AI clusters has reached a point where the local power grids simply cannot deliver enough current. We are witnessing a divergence where the velocity of software evolution is now 10 times faster than the velocity of hardware deployment. A new AI model can be trained in months, but a new high-voltage transmission line takes nearly a decade to permit and build. This structural mismatch is the energy wall, is the point where the invisible hand of the market meets the immovable wall of the physical utility. We are no longer limited by what we can imagine or code, but by what we can physically wire and cool. Northern Virginia is the undisputed capital of the internet. Over 70% of the world's daily internet traffic passes through this region. It is home to hundreds of data centers, massive windowless monoliths that house the brains of the modern world. For decades, the expansion was seamless. Developers would build, and Dominion Energy would connect them to the grid. But the arrival of generative AI changed the math. A standard data center might require 30 to 50 megawatts of power, but the new AI-specific clusters are requesting 300, 500, or even 1,000 megawatts. To put that in perspective, a single gigawatt-scale data center consumes as much electricity as 750,000 homes. When multiple companies requested this level of capacity simultaneously, the local substations simply reached their thermal limit. The 2022 moratorium was a desperate attempt to prevent a regional blackout. Dominion Energy had to explain that they literally did not have the physical wires capable of carrying that much electricity to the specific points where the data centers were being built. The operational reality of a power grid is far more fragile than most people realize. You cannot just push more electricity through an existing wire without consequences. As more current flows through a copper or aluminum conductor, it generates heat due to resistance. If you exceed the thermal rating of a transmission line, the cable will physically sag, potentially touching trees or other structures and causing catastrophic fires. In Northern Virginia, the existing lines were already running near capacity. To add more load, Dominion has to build entirely new 500 kilovolt transmission lines through some of the most expensive and legally protected land in the United States. This involves thousands of environmental impact studies, imminent domain battles with homeowners, and years of bureaucratic approval. The data center developers, who were used to building a massive concrete shell in 18 months, were suddenly told they would have to wait 6 to 8 years for the power. This is not just a delay. It is a full stop for many expansion plans, forcing tech giants to look elsewhere, creating a wave of digital refugees seeking power in less congested states like Ohio and Iowa. The move to secondary markets, however, only delays the inevitable. The same grid constraints that hit Virginia are now appearing across the Midwest and the Sun Belt. The issue is that the American electrical grid is not a single, unified machine. It is a fragmented patchwork of thousands of individual utilities, each with their own regulatory hurdles and aging equipment. When a massive AI cluster moves into a new territory, it acts like a massive vacuum, sucking up all available spare capacity and leaving nothing for local growth or housing. This creates a systemic tension between the tech industry and the local populations. In some cases, the grid is so strained that utilities are being forced to keep old, carbon-intensive coal plants running just to satisfy the demand of the AI clusters, contradicting the green energy promises of the tech giants. The alley was the first domino to fall, but it revealed a structural weakness that spans the entire continent, proving that our digital future is currently tethered to a physical past that is falling apart under the pressure. To understand why we cannot simply build our way out of this crisis in a matter of months, we have to look at the industrial supply chain that sits behind every flick of a light switch. The grid is built on two primary foundations: copper and transformers. A single large-scale substation transformer, known as a large power transformer or LPT, can weigh over 400 tons and cost millions of dollars. These are not mass-produced consumer goods that sit in a warehouse. They're bespoke pieces of heavy machinery, often custom-engineered for a specific geographic location and voltage requirement. Before the AI boom began to accelerate, the lead time to order one of these units was approximately 60 weeks. Today, that lead time has exploded to over 180 weeks, more than 3 years of waiting for a single component. This is the definition of a structural bottleneck. The primary constraint within the transformer itself is a specialized material called grain-oriented electrical steel, or GOES. This is a highly technical type of steel used in the transformer's core to manage magnetic flux with minimal energy loss. There are only a handful of factories globally capable of producing this material at the required quality, and they are currently operating at maximum capacity. Because the barrier to entry for producing GOES is so high, involving complex metallurgy and massive capital investment, supply cannot simply turn on to meet the new demand from AI data centers. We are essentially watching a 21st century digital gold rush being throttled by the manufacturing limits of a 20th century steel industry. If you're a data center developer today, your most valuable asset isn't your software or your H100 chips. It is your place in the queue for a 500 kV transformer. Beyond the steel, we face the inescapable reality of the copper market. The modern electrical grid is the largest consumer of copper on the planet. Every mile of new transmission line, every winding in a transformer, and every cooling system in a massive data center requires thousands of pounds of this red metal. However, we are facing a looming global copper deficit that experts predict could reach 25% by 2030. Most of the world's high-grade copper mines are aging, with their quality declining every year. New mines take an average of 15 to 20 years to go from discovery to production. The AI energy wall is therefore not just an electrical problem. It is a geological and mining problem. As demand for AI grows, it drives up the price of copper, which in turn drives up the cost of building the very infrastructure needed to support that AI. This creates a negative feedback loop where the capital intensity of the tech sector rises, just as the energy constraints become most acute. The strain on the physical grid is now manifesting in the financial markets that govern electricity. In the United States, large regional transmission organizations like PJM Interconnection serve as the clearinghouse for power. Recently, PJM's capacity auctions saw a staggering 400% increase in prices. This is a massive market signal that the buffer of spare electricity has effectively vanished. Data centers are what economists call inelastic consumers. Because a data center represents billions of dollars in sunk capital, it cannot simply turn off when prices get high. It must have power at all costs, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This inelasticity creates a dangerous situation for the average consumer. When a data center is willing to pay almost any price to keep its AI models running, it effectively outbids residential and small business users for the available supply. We are entering an era where your monthly light bill is being directly influenced by the training runs of a large language model hundreds of miles away. The utility companies, caught between the lucrative contracts of big tech and their mandate to provide affordable power to the public, are facing a political and operational crisis. In many jurisdictions, the cost of unnecessary grid upgrades is being socialized across the entire rate-paying base. This means that even if you never use an AI tool, you're likely subsidizing the infrastructure that allows them to exist. The sheer scale of the power requests is also breaking the traditional utility planning model. Historically, utilities planned for load growth of maybe 0.5% to 1% per year. AI is forcing them to contemplate growth rates of 20% or 30% in specific hubs. This magnitude of change is not something a regulated utility can handle with its traditional, slow-moving bureaucracy. In response, some tech giants are attempting to bypass the grid entirely by purchasing their own power plants, such as Amazon's recent deal to buy a data center campus directly connected to a nuclear power station in Pennsylvania. This behind-the-meter strategy allows them to secure power, but it also removes large, reliable power sources from the public grid, further tightening the supply for everyone else. The energy wall is not just a barrier to growth. It is a mechanism for the massive redistribution of energy costs across society. To find a precedent for this decoupling of digital ambition and physical reality, we have to look back to the British Railway Mania of the 1840s. At the time, the software of the era was the sudden, explosive realization of the potential of steam power transport. Thousands of investors, fueled by easy credit and the promise of a connected empire, poured their life savings into railway companies. In a single year, the British Parliament was flooded with over 800 individual bills for new railway lines, mirroring the hundreds of data center permits currently sitting on the desks of county officials. The capital was there, and the demand was undeniable, but the system hit a physical wall that looks remarkably similar to the one we face today. The primary bottleneck was the gauge friction. Because there was no centralized planning, different companies built tracks with different widths. The Great Western Railway used a broad gauge, while others used a standard gauge. When these lines met, goods and passengers couldn't simply transition. They had to be manually offloaded and reloaded onto different trains. This created massive physical bottlenecks that limited the utility of the entire network. Today, our gauge friction is the lack of grid interoperability and the inability to move large amounts of renewable power from where it is generated in the windy plains to where it is needed in the data-hungry urban clusters. Just as 19th century Britain lacked a unified rail standard, the 21st century United States lacks a unified high-voltage transmission standard capable of handling the load of an AI-driven economy. By 1846, the mania reached a terminal point. The crash didn't happen because people stopped wanting to travel by train. It happened because the physical capacity to build, constrained by the supply of iron, the availability of specialized labor, and the slow pace of land acquisition could no longer sustain the financial velocity of the market. The hardware simply could not keep up with the software of financial speculation. We are currently in the 1845 of the AI era. Big tech is spending $200 billion a year on CapEx, building the trains of the future, but they're finding that the tracks, the grid, are either the wrong size, in the wrong place, or simply don't exist yet. The lesson of the 1840s is that when capital outpaces infrastructure, the system undergoes a violent and necessary reset to bring expectations back in line with physical reality. While the Western world grapples with the fragmented nature of private utilities and the bureaucratic labyrinth of local permitting, an entirely different experiment in grid architecture is unfolding in the East. China, facing the same gargantuan energy requirements for its domestic AI ambitions, has approached the infrastructure problem through a lens of centralized, state-driven engineering. The Chinese solution to the energy wall is defined by a massive deployment of ultra-high voltage transmission lines, or UHV. These lines, operating at 800 kilovolts or higher, are the electrical equivalent of a high-speed rail network for electrons. They allow the state to transport vast amounts of power from the wind and solar-rich provinces of the far west to the data center hubs and industrial clusters of the eastern coast with minimal transmission loss. The technical gap between the American and Chinese grids is becoming a strategic liability. Most U.S. transmission lines operate at 345 or 500 kilovolts, which are standards established decades ago. China's State Grid Corporation has invested hundreds of billions of dollars to build a unified, nationwide supergrid that can balance load across thousands of miles in real time. This centralized command allows them to bypass the gauge friction that plagues Western markets. In the U.S., moving power across state lines often requires negotiating with multiple independent system operators and hundreds of private landowners. In China, the grid is treated as a singular, strategic asset of the state, allowing for a speed of deployment that Western tech giants can only envy. This infrastructure advantage means that Chinese AI clusters may soon have access to more stable and cheaper power than their counterparts in Virginia or Dublin. In contrast, the European model presents a third path, one defined by extreme regulatory caution and high energy costs. Countries like Ireland and the Netherlands, which are early leaders in hosting European data centers, have hit a literal hard stop. The Irish grid, for example, is so constrained that data centers now consume nearly 20% of the nation's total electricity. This has led to de facto bans on new connections in the Dublin area, forcing tech companies to build their own private gas-fired power plants just to keep the lights on. While China builds superhighways for power and the U.S. struggles with its aging country roads, Europe is effectively closing its borders to the energy wall. The geopolitical implication is clear. The future of AI dominance may not be decided by who has the best researchers, but by whose government can most effectively coordinate the pouring of concrete and the stringing of high-tension wires. Even if we solve the problem of getting electricity to the data center, we are immediately confronted by the second law of thermodynamics. All that energy must eventually be rejected as heat. As AI chips like the NVIDIA H100 and the upcoming Blackwell series push the limits of power density, the traditional method of air cooling, blowing cold air over servers with massive fans, is reaching its physical limit. We are seeing a shift toward liquid cooling, where specialized fluids are pumped directly to the chip to carry heat away. This process is significantly more efficient, but introduces a massive new dependency: water. A single large-scale AI training run can consume millions of gallons of water through evaporation in cooling towers. The scale of this water consumption is creating a new type of localized friction. In drought-prone regions of the American West, the arrival of a massive data center is increasingly seen as a threat to the local water supply. We are essentially trading one scarce resource for another, using electrons to generate intelligence and water to prevent the machines from melting. This is the thermal wall, as we pack more transistors into smaller spaces to achieve higher AI performance. The heat density becomes comparable to that of a nuclear reactor core. If the cooling system fails for even a few seconds, the specialized silicon, which costs tens of thousands of dollars per chip, can be permanently damaged by its own thermal output. Furthermore, we must address the Jevons paradox in the context of AI energy. As chips become more efficient, they don't actually reduce total energy consumption. Instead, the increased efficiency makes AI cheaper and more useful, which drives a massive explosion in total demand that far outpaces the efficiency gains. Every time NVIDIA releases a chip that is 2x more efficient per watt, the market responds by deploying 10x more of them. We are caught in a cycle where technological progress is accelerating the depletion of physical capacity. The thermodynamic reality is that intelligence is an energy-intensive process, and there is no free lunch in the laws of physics. The more thought we delegate to machines, the more we heat the physical world around them. When we synthesize these factors, the grid bottlenecks, the commodity shortages, the inelastic demand, and the thermal limits, a sobering picture emerges. We have spent the last 2 years assuming that AI progress is an unstoppable exponential curve. But exponential curves in biology and physics eventually hit a carrying capacity. The AI energy wall is that carrying capacity. If the cost of power and infrastructure continues to rise, the ROI on training ever larger models begins to collapse. We are approaching a point where the marginal utility of adding another trillion parameters to an LLM is outweighed by the staggering marginal cost of the electrons and copper required to support it. This suggests that we may be entering an era of architectural realism. Instead of simply throwing more compute at the problem, researchers will be forced to find ways to make AI fundamentally more efficient, not just at the chip level, but at the algorithmic level. However, history shows that such transitions are slow and difficult. The easy gains of scaling laws are being replaced by the hard reality of physical laws. If we cannot modernize the grid at the speed of the software, the AI revolution will not end with a sentient superintelligence, but with a series of rolling blackouts and a stagnation of model performance as the world runs out of spare electricity. The systemic inevitability is that the digital and physical worlds are being forced into a violent reintegration. For 30 years, the tech world felt like it existed in a separate dimension, a world of bits and light that was exempt from the heavy, dirty constraints of the industrial age. The AI energy wall has ended that illusion. Silicon Valley is now finding that it is just as dependent on miners in Chile and steelworkers in Ohio as any 19th century railroad tycoon. The future of intelligence is now tied to the most basic and ancient of human struggles, the mastery of energy and the transformation of the physical environment. We are not just building a brain. We are building the most power-hungry organism in history, and the cage we have built for it, our aging electrical grid, is starting to buckle. The AI energy wall is not a temporary hurdle or a minor logistical delay. It is a structural reality that defines the hard limits of our digital ambition. For the last 30 years, we operated under the silent assumption that the physical world would always adapt to the needs of the virtual one. We built faster chips and more complex algorithms, assuming the electricity to power them would be as abundant and invisible as the air we breathe. But as we have explored, the conversion of data into intelligence is fundamentally an industrial process that demands an astronomical amount of physical resources, from high-grade copper to bespoke electrical steel. We are now at a terminal crossroads where we must choose between maintaining a 20th century grid designed for light bulbs and refrigerators, or building a 21st century infrastructure capable of sustaining a planetary-scale artificial mind. The current path of least resistance is not a solution. It is a strategy of managed decline. To truly break through the wall, we need a level of investment and regulatory reform not seen since the original electrification of the world a century ago. This investigation into the crisis in Data Center Alley and the global transformer shortage reveals that the bottleneck is not just technical, but deeply systemic. It is a profound misalignment of development timelines, financial incentives, and immutable physical laws. If we fail to address this infrastructure decoupling, the AI revolution will likely enter a period of diminishing returns, where only the wealthiest nation-states and corporate titans can afford the energy required to innovate. This is the ultimate lesson of the energy wall. In the end, the speed of software is always held hostage by the speed of the electron. If you found this deep dive into the systems beneath the numbers valuable, please support the channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your engagement is the fuel that allows us to continue building these analytical frameworks. We want to hear your perspective. Is the biggest threat the physical supply of copper or the bureaucratic gridlock of our utility systems? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.